anybody was able to use the written submission channels, and Francis and I read every one of those submissions and tried to our best of our capacity to include those submissions in our work. We're in a different place now, where the official negotiation has started, and we're able to consider input that are coming either from the parties through the open-ended working group, from SBSTA and SBI, and from official thematic consultation. We cannot consider input that is coming from outside of those sources. So it is important for your input to be carried by a party or inputted in the process through SBI and SBSTA. Yet that channel is an important one. It is an important way for all stakeholders to be engaged in the discussion and make their views known. Parties are looking at that channel and are looking at the input that is provided. Now that's the final section I will talk about before handing over to Francis. Let's talk about draft one. So basically what you will see in draft one, the 2050 goals, which is about the status of things, what we want, what is the world we want to live in, looking like in 2050. You will see milestones. Basically, if we want to get to that status in 2050, what are the milestone or the status that we need to be at in 2030? The targets, things we need to do, and that's going to be there. And then section E to H. As said earlier, we will reflect the outcome of open-ended working group, SBSTA 24 and SBI 3, and then we'll consider written submission up to February 24th, and the thematic consultation. So that is completing my part of the presentation. I now will hand that to Francis, and Francis, just signal me verbally. I'll be happy to turn the slide to you.
Thank you, Basile. I'll now go to the remaining slides, which is now to look at the different perspectives, and I think in there we're going to look at the issue of gender as well. Now, biodiversity, as you know, is important for all of us. It's not something that anybody can deny its importance to even at individual level. So when you're talking about a framework for all, we're also talking about a resource that is basically there for all. And so that diverse perspective in creating the framework becomes even all the more important. So of course we have got the mandate of the CBD, most of you know that. And we have got the party negotiations where we expect decisions to come, but also we have got broad-ranging, observation coming from different stakeholders, their needs, as well as aligning with the other multilateral environmental agreements. And this is something the co-chair has already alluded to earlier, the BEN 2, and because biodiversity again touches on almost all these conventions, but also communication, and this is something that kept coming up very strongly during the regional consultations, during all the meetings we've had, that we need to be communicating better for this framework. And in that case, therefore, be able to raise the political and the public ambition. What are we up to? So that this time around, we have biodiversity taken up there, like any other of these global challenges. And of course, it may mean we can here or there reshuffle opportunities, look at what priorities, look at what could be most urgent. But in a sense, all these issues become as very, very urgent. And then we are looking at opportunities that the COVID could bring into the world. One would say the green opportunity. Of course, if you see what has happened recently, you will see clearly that the COVID has clearly indicated to us that we can put nature back to recovery, because there's been less struggle. Ecosystem maybe have experienced less pressure. People are mainly in lockdown, and we have seen ecosystem recovering. So it is possible actually still to make this year and the decades to come, that of biodiversity. And therefore, we look at, again, how we can continue to incorporate issues of gender in that perspective so that all these things go together as a package. So there is, of course, now the change that we might see a lot of people emphasizing health more, because as you'll see in the slides to come, we cannot delink biodiversity from health. We cannot delink nature from health. And so we think that this COVID could have opened us opportunity to really make the case for biodiversity. And that brings in the aspect of the One Health aspect, where you're looking at the health of the animals, the health of plants, the health of ecosystems. So all that, in a way, means that you have to look at the system as one, not in isolation. And so when you will be looking at the next version of the documents as they come through, you will see that Basile and I have made really effort to link a lot on health. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is what I was referring to earlier in the previous slide, that when you're looking at biodiversity and you're looking at health, in most cases, maybe biodiversity could be, some people would say it is the one that maybe you have the issues on health emanating from, but at the same time, it is also from where we get the solutions for most of these health issues. Right now, we have the COVID, but most likely, even the vaccine and most of this that is being pursued is still going to come back from nature. So it has got that kind of combination in it. It can be a source where viruses or other diseases may spread, but also the solution comes from within itself there. So that is how unique biodiversity is to the human being. But also we see that maybe going forward, after this pandemic is over, there might be a lot of changes in governments in terms of how they put in measures to recover the economies. But we think that even as that is being done, it shouldn't be that we leave or we don't take that opportunity to still emphasize the importance of biodiversity in actually giving us a better future for the years to come. So most governments might be looking at economic stimulus and so many other issues. And of course, the challenge is, are they going to be looking at other issues and again, forget about biodiversity, give less funding to it? We think that we need to do a good job here. Of course, the linkage to climate change and biodiversity has always been said, talks about, so we need to look at those windows. And so we have a very big challenge to make sure that the world does not leave biodiversity this time around behind. And so maybe let's see then if this framework is adopted sometime, say 2021, will the funds still be there? Because maybe by the time we started this discussion, and we are hopeful that it will be over in October this year, perhaps commitments would have been there. But unfortunately, this pandemic then comes in. So the challenge is, by next year, when probably hold COP, what will still be in there in the basket for us for biodiversity? That is all we need to be keeping our eye on. So go to the next one. So women, girls, and biodiversity, and it is very gratifying to see now we have Women4Biodiversity.org. I mean, in many ways, women are more in contact with nature on a day-to-day basis. Not that men are not, but if you look at things in a very realistic way, you'll see that women are more in contact with the nature, more in contact with the biodiversity. So in a way, they have to that like the first managers of biodiversity actually, because they will collect firewood from there, they will get medicine from there, a lot of things that they collect for the benefit of the family. And so that is why when there is loss of biodiversity, you will say that the most affected group becomes the women, because even the food on the table, it is the women who will usually go out and bring it. So women are so much affected by loss of biodiversity. But as I said again, women are the ones who are the majority of food or engaged in food production all over the world. That cannot be, downplayed. So then they also have these intergenerational linkages of nature and the impacts of this loss of biodiversity, which I've said earlier can affect women and affect them negatively. So when you're talking about integrating gender issues, gender response issues in the post-2020, I think it is for a good cause that it is actually done. So how do we then see you participating in this process? One is that for women in the developing countries, we also know that the ownership, leasing of lands may not be permitted due to customary laws and traditions. So how do we handle that going forward? Two, women need to be more proactively engaged at every level of decision making. And of course, we have seen this over the years, that sometimes they sit back or sometimes are not given an opportunity to do that. But I think for the world to be a better place, for the world to really give women that space to do their work freely and willingly also, I think there is a need for them to feel or be made part of the decision making. And that will reinforce and give them confidence. So the governance issues that perhaps bar women or prevent them from participating in decision making, those are the things that needs to be addressed. Can go to the next one. I think I'm not finished. Yes. So how do you influence the post-2020 process? Because as most of you are now know about the procedures of how all these things happening, is that you will need to advocate for your points through parties to make them become part of what parties take on the floor and submit or air out during the open recording group and any other of these meetings. So you need to identify some of those countries that could be your allies, could be like-minded parties that will help you to front your cause. So you therefore need to identify and share those national, local, and grassroots examples of success where gender-based intervention on biodiversity can really make a difference. But also, you need to remind the parties of their commitment that we had this gender action plan, the one of 2015-2020, and for which is, of course, now coming more or less towards the end now this year, but it needs to be taken forward. So that is the other opportunity that you have. And then, most importantly, as I said earlier, we need to be justifying why there should be increased investment in biodiversity because of its importance that we have seen: culture, health, ecosystem resilience, mitigation against climate impacts, and so forth. All this, we get it from nature, we get it from biodiversity by just investing more there. And biodiversity does the rest. But with less investment, that means all these other benefits will likely also disappear. So for you, we know at the CBD meetings, you are important partners, you will be observers, but also you will bring expertise in these meetings. At the thematic discussion, SAPSA 24, SBI 3, Open Working Group 3, COP15, you are all very important stakeholders, but find again a niche, how you really bring your issues so that it doesn't miss out from getting onto the floor and therefore be included in the document. Because for us as co-chairs, it is the parties that will really, help us out to include some of these issues. Because if you only tell us as the co-chairs and it's not coming from the parties, it becomes very, very difficult. You rather make the issue be debated by parties, and then as co-chairs, we see how we integrate them. And I think you need to, of course, continue to have your organizations and relationship with other global organizations in place. Like we received, you organize this one, you can continue with those coalitions so that as time goes on, you build a stronger and a formidable relationship and what I call it, networking with other organizations, so that your case, of course, gains more momentum as we move forward. So perhaps that brings us to the last slide now, co-share, which is on the COP15. Again, you've heard about this. This date is not yet fixed, but definitely not taking place this year now, given what we all have seen and known. but still will be in China next year, and the date is still being discussed. So that is the moving target we've had. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, co-chairs Basile and Francis, for taking this opportunity and also for stressing and sharing your perspectives on the gender work that has also actually seen some more visibility in the last meeting, especially the second open-ended working group. So without further ado, I will look at some questions after this, but we have Tanya from the CVD Secretariat.
I just want to say thanks. Thanks very much to everyone on this call. It's so great to see so many people here and so many familiar faces. Thanks to Tina and Amelia for organizing this. It's so great that we have a body of people coalescing around the gender issues. This has been a work in progress, as Tina mentioned, in COP13, which was in 2016. We had a very small group, and it's really grown since then, and so has the interest and the attention on gender issues. I also very much want to thank the co-chairs for taking this time with everyone and really explaining the process, and also talking about the gender considerations and how it ties into this process where there's so many other issues at play, and we have the COVID situation, which is complicating timelines as well as introducing new factors into the discussion. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to keep this quite short. Tina, if you can just go to the next slide. I just want to give you this has been covered to some extent by what Francis has already said, but I just wanted to highlight some of the sort of what we had been calling priority areas that have been put forward in terms of consideration for how gender needs to be addressed in the post-2020 framework. And these areas come from a lot of discussion, partly from the expert group, or in large part, I should say, from the expert group meeting that was held with UN Women in the Secretariat. A number of people who are online today were there. That was in April 2019 in New York. And that was really a first look at how we need to tackle gender and try and move the needle forward, as we say. Where can we get to? Where do we want to get to in this next 10+ year period going forward? So some of the key issues, which many of you are well aware of, it comes back to women being fully engaged in decision making and in leadership roles in different levels of biodiversity governance. So that's at the local level in terms of community-based natural resource management activities, and it goes up from there in terms of representation and engagement in national institutions, but also in terms of things like participation in the forestry sector, participation in the agriculture sector. Like in developed countries around the world, we still see that these kind of more traditionally biodiversity related sectors are still dominated by men, especially at the upper levels. So this is something that we need to be aware of and see how to address, and what that representation actually means in terms of how we manage resources, which is a part of the question here. So as part of this, the other critical factor is around access, ownership, control over resources, notably land. This has been identified in the SDGs as a prominent commitment. There's still a lot of progress that needs to be made in this area. So as much as we can work towards that and have parties committing to take actions to address this, if possible, under the convention is a significant aspect of the work. And another area is around equitable sharing of benefits. And here I've highlighted benefits from biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, as well as from the utilization of genetic resources. And this comes back to things like who is benefiting from the establishment of protected areas? Are women having equal opportunities for employment? Are they having equal access to the distribution of benefits from different payment for ecosystem services, such as RED+, among others? So it's trying to look at the different ways in which benefits are derived in addition to those coming from intellectual property and the use of genetic resources. So just to highlight, as has been mentioned in the chat and the co-chair's presentation, there is a draft target that has been proposed in the framework so far that refers to equitable participation in decision making and ensuring rights over relevant resources. And this is for Indigenous peoples and local communities, women and girls, and youth. So that some of that language is in one target in the framework. Now, one of the other objectives that we've had, I think, as a body and as those who are working on gender-related issues in this process is really to see how gender can be mainstreamed across the framework. And that's a challenge because there are so many different areas where there's a lot of very technical measures that are, it's hard to add in aspects on women and girls without making the framework itself unmanageable or perhaps too long. So one of the options in terms of looking at how we can better or potentially mainstream gender is in the area of gender and biodiversity indicators. So Verona from UN Women is going to talk a little bit about some work that's being undertaken on that. So I will leave that to her. But just to flag that as another aspect where we need to really continue to look as we go forward in these next few months as to how we can find opportunities to both communicate the relevance and identify points in which there can be some actions or monitoring of actions that relate to gender and women and girls in respect to all of the different targets. So can you go to the next slide? Okay. So work underway right now. One of the things that was mandated out of the last COP, which was in November in Egypt, November 2019, was that there would be a review of implementation of the 2015-2020 Gender Plan of Action. So this has now been done. The report has been prepared. I was hoping it would be online by now, but unfortunately we have a bit of a backlog and the substantive documents are going online first. So it will be online relatively soon, but this review was undertaken based on a review of the 6 national reports and 2 global surveys. So one was for government representatives and one was for representatives of other organizations, other relevant organizations. So it was looking at best practices, lessons learned, and gaps. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the findings here. One of the things that came out is that the Gender Plan of Action that we have had in place has been useful as a policy and advocacy tool. And at the same time, there is a recognition that there is a need for clear and actionable and measurable gender and biodiversity objectives. I think that relates to, in part, the plan itself, and in part what was reflected in the strategic plan for 2011 to 2020 for biodiversity that did not have other concrete specifications around gender or addressing the needs of women and girls. So there's a recognition that that is necessary, and also a need for longer term investment and concerted action, as we all know, is critical. And I think one of the things that came from the national reports is the fact that where we did have reporting on gender, there was a tendency to focus on specific projects. And which makes sense. That's where the funding and the efforts are directed in many cases, but it doesn't allow us to kind of draw a picture or maybe enable a stronger action at larger scales, such as at the national scale. So in general, there is still a need for further capacity development, for collection analysis of sex disaggregated data, and for adequate financing and reporting. And just to talk a little bit about the reporting side of things, we had about 70, well, this review was sort of a midway look at the national reports. So there's some national reports that have been submitted since the end of last year, which were not included in this review. But a good number, I would say, out of those that were reviewed, about 75% included some reference to women and girls, and about, I think it was 20%, had about 50 or more references to women or girls, which is a big improvement to what we've had in previous years. But I would say that is also in large part that extra focus on the reporting was also thanks to UNDP had a project with the Global Environment Facility to support countries, a number of countries, to develop their 6 national reports. And they put a focus on the development of gender responsive reports in that project. So they provided specific guidance and did a bit of a technical review with a number of countries on their reports and supported them to actually identify areas that they could report on gender. And as a result, we have some reporting from countries which is much more substantial than what we've had in the past, which includes some references to the types of gender biodiversity indicators that were used and some data that has been collected. So I think that just goes to show what is required to get us to the point where we have a stronger level of reporting, and that, you know, in these cases that also indicates that this implementation was underway, but maybe was not reflected or is not reflected in everyone's reporting. On the implementation side, I would, in the survey results that we received, we had results or responses from governments were that I think it was 27% of government respondents thought the implementation at the national level of the Gender Plan of Action was effective, and about 40% thought it was somewhat effective. So that's a majority that thought it was effective in terms of implementation. You know, that's out of those people that responded to the survey. And there was I think a view from the organizational side that the implementation had been less effective. So that's just a bit of an indication or a bit of an overview of some of the information that's in this report to SBI that will be available soon. I also want to highlight that there is now underway a best practices review. So this is going beyond what was undertaken for the report to look at trying to identify some more innovative, transformational, and larger scale best practices from addressing issues related to gender and biodiversity that can help point the way to where we want to go or where we could go for the post-2020 period. So this is kind of a complementary piece to the work that has already been done, and that is intended to be ready for presentation at SBI 3, but the best practices review is underway now. And so one thing at the bottom of this slide is a new thing that will interest you. So out of the discussions or out of the review process, there was a clear indication that parties and organizations really felt that it was useful to have a new gender plan of action, but that one should be prepared at in a participatory, inclusive process and consultative process, so that we would really ensure to engage the commitment of parties and other stakeholders in the plan in order to support its implementation. And I think that's, you know, not necessarily how the plans were developed up until now. It was more an exercise that was led more by the Secretariat side. So this is something, the development of a new plan. It has been proposed, and it was something that we had intended as the Secretariat to initiate a process after COP15, when COP was initially meant to be in October, that could be based on the agreed framework and involve a series of discussions with parties and with other stakeholders to come up with a robust plan. Now that our timelines have shifted due to the pandemic, and we have a longer period before COP, and we have now we have a draft text to work with from the framework. A decision has been taken very recently to start developing a draft of what a new plan, gender plan, could look like. So I am flagging this here for you to be aware of. This is very much a new proposal, and it's I guess a work in progress in terms of determining the timeline. So we'll keep you informed, but the goal is to try and have some consultative process similar to what is being proposed for the post-2020 documents, to have a peer review exercise and to have some webinar and other discussion online to discuss elements of a draft that could be reviewed at SBI 3. So I just want to make you aware of that, and further information can follow on that. And then I can just quickly go to my last slide, if you can. And this is just to highlight again, for your information, those who haven't seen it, this is a recent publication by the Secretariat that looks at a series of biodiversity objectives. So these are based on the Aichi targets, the themes of the Aichi targets, and looks at gender issues that are relevant for each of those biodiversity areas and actions that can be taken to address them. So it has some different case examples from around the world. So this is a useful kind of informational piece, and I encourage you to take a look or make use of it in your own work as may be appropriate. So I will leave things there. I think I've probably talked for too long, but thanks very much again, everyone, and I'm happy to take questions in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. That was very, very informative. Thank you so much. So now I would like to welcome Verona.
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing this, Tina and Amelia. This has been very, very helpful. And I also, like Tanya, I would like to thank the co-chairs of this process. And all the active champions in the process, the CBD process. So I'm Verona Collantes. I'm an intergovernmental specialist with UN Women, and I'm following the Rio Convention's processes. It has been a very recent, only recently that I've engaged in this process, but the development, like the speed and the progress of how gender perspectives have been moving in terms of the integration of gender perspectives in the process is really very encouraging. And as mentioned already by the speakers before me, in fact, there has really been a mandate on this for the development of the post-2020 framework to be gender responsive. So that's really the anchor. And together with all the champions, I think we had really moved the needle quite a bit in the integration of gender perspectives. And I thank not only the co-chairs, but also all the parties. True enough, as Francis mentioned, the parties are key, and this is a party-driven process, and we all acknowledge that. And this is why UN Women, together with other partners, including the Women's Caucus, technical experts, UNEP, WCMC, CBD, of course, and other players, have been working together since we had this mandate to work on a post-2020, gender-responsive post-2020 process, that we've really started to work together. Because what we found out was, I sent a message in the chat box congratulating the co-chairs, because really I can see how articulation of gender perspectives has now been strengthened with the co-facilitators also able to really, I couldn't say it any better than Francis did when he made the connection between women and women's role in biodiversity conservation and also the impact on them of biodiversity loss. So as I mentioned, we have really been receiving encouraging supports and contributions from parties and stakeholders, and which then led us to continue working on this, on contributing technical inputs to the process. Some of the colleagues already mentioned the workshop that we have organized last year, which served as a basis now for these priority action areas that Tanya presented in her slides earlier, that we're looking at for advancing gender equality and women's empowerment in the post-2020 process, relating to decision-making and meaningful participation, access, ownership and control over resources, and also benefits, access to benefits of not only genetic resources, but also biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. So we have been working around these three priority areas, and our inputs at the level of indicators in the targets have all been around this area. So we will continue to work around this. We know that the request is, of course, to work at the level of indicators. And we also know that there is a gap in terms of this information, the information on indicators, because obviously women's contribution or even the analysis of women's role in biodiversity conservation has, I've been saying this, like has been invisible. So it's become like just part of their normal work, their chores. Like Francis said, they go and collect wood, food, medicines, but it's not counted. It's not counted as part of their contribution because it's considered as part of their normal work. So I think there is a lot of there's that gap. And this is why we are working with technical experts, including UNEP, WCMC, in bringing to the table indicators that are already out there, linked to SDGs. We start with that. There are also indicators that are being used in other environment-related mechanisms. We know that Ramsar, for example, the Ramsar Convention also has started to make this linkage and focus on the gender dimensions of their work. So we will look at that connection as well. The UNCCD Secretariat and the Convention, and also the UNFCCC. So we will look at all of the ways of understanding gender dimensions, even not at the level of indicators at this point, but if we can get indicators, that's what we are working on. So this is to update on that work, and we hope that with our technical work, this project that UN Women and the UNEP WCMC will be working on in the next few months. The aim is for this work to serve as technical inputs to capture gender responsive indicators and to input it into the whatever documents that will come out that Basile mentioned earlier for SBSTA, for SBI, relevant documents, information documents. We will be working with providing inputs to those documents, but we also understand, as the co-chairs have mentioned, that this is an intergovernmental process, and we will do it through the proper channels. That is very well understood. And finally, I just want to take this opportunity to ask colleagues who are in this call to reach out to us, because we need everybody's inputs. As I mentioned, information and indicators are very, very much lacking. And through the contributions of those working in governments, the policy implementers, policymakers, and also community leaders, all of you women heading organizations, your networks, please, we will reach out to you also formally, but I'm already taking this opportunity to invite you. Your inputs are very much welcome. So we will also try to engage at SABSA and SBI. Some of us maybe through virtual participation, but we will definitely make sure that we will have these inputs available to parties and also through other stakeholders, and be shared in the intergovernmental process. So I will stop there, and I very much welcome some questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Verona. Thank you so much for also highlighting what the necessary next steps. And I think it would be really very crucial to look at these important discussions, because some of them were reflective of the expert workshop that you and Women you had organized, and identifying some key possible 80 possible indicators that could be used for the post-2020. So really to see how this discussion would be taken forward for the subset 2024, and looking at those documents and seeing how to kind of take it forward from there. So so I will just keep until there, and I will thank you so much for the panel members of being here. So I'll keep the floor open now for any questions.
Hello, thank you very much for this amazing space for considerations, and it's bringing us a lot of thinking. I would like to ask if you perceived any specific or particular actions in this post-2020 framework that will speak about particular ecosystems, for example, oceans, where we would need to be very careful to also input with the ideas and participation and voices of, for example, fisher women, that would not be framed into a more global or general perspective, but we would need to pay a particular attention, since there will be in that framework particular interest on a particular ecosystem. I'm not sure if the question is framed, but do you see any way in which we can actually act towards this particular vulnerable and marginalized women in this process? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vienna. Who would you like? Is there a question proposed for a particular speaker? Or?
Well, I think it's a general. I think any can ask if this, if there's any way which can be more intense, let's say, in inputs towards this particular sectors of within a gender perspective that might be important to consider in this whole process.
Yeah, do you want me to start?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Mr. Basile.
So this is a very interesting and a difficult question. So we're creating a framework that look at global issues, and you will, if you look at draft 0, you will see that we try to stay away from having particular target for a certain ecosystem. So there is targets about protection of ecosystem in general, and when you see the table, the new table for performance indicators, you will see that we go down to the specific ecosystem at that level. Now, my sense is that the perspective of women in particular part of the world and particular ecosystem, for example, as you mentioned, women engaged in fishing activities, will be most useful and are critical at the implementation phase. So if you have a target that calls for the take of wildlife to be sustainable, that means sustainable fishery, how do you operationalize that at the national level? And how do you personalize that at the local level? We're going to need to define structure, or countries will need to define structure at the national level and at the regional level that enable the implementation of those targets and those decisions. And it is at that point, if it's not coming from the local community, if it's not coming from the women and the group engaged in those activities, it's not going to work. So it has to come from them. So that's where I think it's going to be very important for you as a group, collectively, to input in the targets. And then when on the other end of the process, we have a decision in the COP and we come down to implement those decisions at local level, then you have a super important role in making those decisions real. So it's kind of in two places. Francis, you may have a more eloquent way of answering that.
Not really, Co-Chair. Just I think the way you put it still is very much the point. I just want to give a small example of what is happening in Uganda currently. We have a project on implementation of the Rio Conventions that is looking at biodiversity, looking at CBD, climate change, and land degradation. And something that has come up from that project is the issue of really looking at the gender aspects of the gender issues concerning implementation of the Rio Conventions in Uganda. And so we are now at the point of developing a national gender action plan. We just have a draft at the moment as I speak. And I think then that talks to what the co-chair was saying, that some of those issues, you can do it down at the national level when you're actually implementing. And there are very good ideas already coming in that action plan. And some of them was pointed out, I think, by Tanya there, looking at those issues of segregating the gender data as you implement the activities and identifying those activities and seeing how you integrate gender in them. So some of them might be what can be done best at the level of implementation, as co-chair pointed out, but where possible, perhaps countries could be making that effort to actually come up with some kind of a gender action plan that would then guide how gender issues could be better handled when implementing those whether targets or goals of the post-2020.
Thank you. Could I ask Lorena to join with her question?
Yes, thank you. This is a question mainly for Tanya and Verona, and hi to everyone from Costa Rica as well. It is in relation to the development of the new gender action plan, if they can share a little bit how they see the process and next steps, especially under the present circumstances.
Thank you. Over Basile, and then Francis and Tanya would like to respond.
Sure. Yeah, I can take this. Thanks, Lorena. Nice to see you. Yeah, this is a sort of a new development, as I mentioned. So we're still trying to determine what would be the best process. But right now, I think it would be the idea of having like a month-long period for peer review of a draft, let's say a document with elements, some draft elements, or a very draft version of a plan, and then having what we've discussed so far is trying to have a sort of an online discussion or some kind of exercise even like this to really just talk through the different dimensions after people have had a chance to look at it, and then have a document that will be prepared for SBI. So that would be the next opportunity when parties and organizations are hopefully present together to be able to discuss what would still be a draft. And then a decision could be taken if that can be developed for COP. So the time frame, I guess, roughly speaking, is that we would be working towards having a decision for COP, but it would be a draft, you know, very much a draft that can still be developed in the time period up until then. But this is all very new, so this is in parentheses, but yes, that's what's proposed so far.
Hey, Tina, can I have like a minute?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just to complement what Tanya mentioned, and also to respond to Claudia. Claudia had a question on how we're integrating human rights into this process. So which makes me want to come in, because Tanya, I think that's a good suggestion there for our thinking also about the gender action plan. I think to link the human rights dimensions to it. And that being said, I am aware that in the context of the post-2020 process, there is a group of champions working also on more specifically in human rights, and maybe Tina can also add to this. I'm aware that there's this group has started working. There was a thematic consultation just before the second open-ended working group on the human rights, linking human rights and putting it up front, not only in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, but also in terms of the gender action plan. And as I have the floor, I'll be very much interested in what Francis mentioned about the gender action plan of Uganda, because now we're looking, UN Women is working on a paper, policy brief on the synergies in the implementation of the 3 Rio Conventions from a gender perspective. So I think I will do an outreach to Francis specifically to get information on this, because this will inform our paper, because we want to highlight what's being done on the ground by parties. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Verona. Yes, and I wanted to actually address Claudia's question, but thank you so much for also your response to that. I was not taking the floor because I was trying to just help moderate the session, but let me quickly show myself to everybody. Hi, everybody. Yes, so the work on right to a healthy environment has been taking place since about 2 years now. And now there's a group where I'm also involved with the CBD Women's Caucus to try to push in the human rights dimension into the post-2020 work and try to also linking up with the other synergies. So there was a thematic consultation on that, and the report I think should be available. I think it was also presented during the second open-ended working group. And one of the work that they have also been doing is working with the special rapporteur on the human rights and the environment, who recently had a call on ecosystems, human rights. So I'll be happy to share the further information about it, but this is something, and I think looking at the COVID problem that we are having, it really does make us really think that we really need to have some transformative actions. It is really time, and this has been I would say a rude awakening for us. And I think we should take this opportunity of ensuring how we can really address this. So I won't take the floor, but I will ask. So Claudia had asked for the floor, so I'll give Claudia, and then I know Pradeep is waiting. So Claudia, a quick question, and then Pradeep, you'll be next online. So thank you.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you so much also for highlighting this parallel process, and in terms of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Environment, who will be presenting his report at the UN General Assembly. So my question is also in terms of how do we make sure that these UN processes, including the Secretary General call for action on human rights, that is very explicit on women and girl rights, and also refers specifically on the right to a healthy environment, we can make sure that this is incorporated, and this UN Executive Secretary call also refers to the rights of well, specifically to human rights defenders. So if we apply it to CBD, we would be also thinking of environmental human rights defenders. So how can we make sure that this is included both in the gender plan of action and the post-2020 global biodiversity framework? And the question is to the co-chairs, if they think of any strategies.
Thank you, Claudia. You raise an interesting point, and I think we've been looking at the synergy process with kind of concentric cycle. You know, first looking at the MEAs, then looking at the other Rio Convention, etc., and then looking beyond. And I think the challenge we have is how do we work within the context of the SDG, and how do we need to see biodiversity at the center of a web with all the other linking to it, or do we see the biodiversity as part of a constellation with the others linking to each other? And I don't have an answer to that, and I think I'll be looking at the advice from others, from you, and the technical advice from Tanya and our colleagues at the Secretariat in terms of how do we link with this area of activity within the UN system. My sense is that there is probably value in not creating new structures, but using existing structures and working with existing committees, etc. There is a lot of bureaucracy that already exists, and it's very easy to get lost in all those systems. So I'll look for the advice of others. Definitely, I think there is no barriers. I think CBD is able to link and work with any organization, and we've looked outside of the biodiversity or the scientific area as we're working with UNESCO, for example. So definitely. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see the discussion at Substar. There is a paper that will be issued about the linkage between SDGs and the CBD indicators, and we're going to see how we can, instead of creating new structure, using existing ones. But I'm sure Francis and Tanya may have more to add to that.
Thank you, Basile. Yeah, I think this discussion really needs another webinar by itself. And I think it is to also see how the human rights approach can actually take on the whole of the post-2020 process, but not only look at the gender plan of action. I'm also happy to see that there are a lot of discussion on the chat. And Pernilla, thank you so much for also joining the call. Pernilla is from SWID-Bio and the lead organizer of the human rights workshop that took place here in Chiang Mai, actually. So Pradeep is waiting for a while. So Pradeep, I will give you a minute to ask you a question. And after that, Pernilla, maybe if you would like to have a moment or two. So Pradeep, yes, please. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you, Nalin. And this is Pradeep. I work with this Udom, and we are promoting this forest food systems, and it's a part of our community resilience program. And it is a huge tracts of it is a community forest that has been provided, that has been protected, and that has providing this food, water, medicine, and it's fiber and everything. And looking at this, even if this is COVID-19, it is highly important. It is highly important to provide the nutrition and forgotten foods, uncultivated foods in the forest. So that I should ask, that is anybody, any organization who has done this study, cultural biodiversity, so that can help us, to know that is how this is the culture is related to biodiversity conservation and looking for this even livelihood resilience. Because we are part of this JEF and its UNFCCC and UNDP, UNEP, and we are asking that to know more, to learn more on these community processes, even if especially women folks, the way we are handling here, huge tracts of community forest that has been managed well, and getting the benefit out of this, even drought mitigation, flood mitigation, and its food, critical food elements, And so I want to know that any organization is having the cultural biodiversity study, so that that will help to us. And anything else, and you can ask, I can also share with you all.
Yeah, thank you, Pradeep. Thanks. That was a very valid question, and it's actually a query. And I don't know whether the chairs or you and Women would like to take part, but I just want to say that yes, one of the things that, and I know that some of our IIFB, the International Indigenous Forum for Biodiversity colleagues, have also attending here. So just for your information, Pradeep, culture is one of the biggest, one of the other linkages that the indigenous peoples have been working towards linking the whole biodiversity discussion. So there is this whole, how do you really link nature and culture together? So I'll be happy to share further information on it. And maybe one relevant work for you to check would be the CBD's work on traditional knowledge on Article 8J. I know we have very less minutes, Basile and Francis, you have to go.
Just to share, that is the culture, nature and water and food with this life and livelihood is totally interlinked with this lifestyle. So that we should have that kind of promotional initiative to scale, to expand, and even if we're mitigating all kind of hazards.
Yes, would any of the panel like to respond?
Tanya?
Verona.
Yeah, just to respond quickly on what was mentioned about how we're linking all of this in other processes going on in New York. As you know, well, we've been working with the parties here and also the organizers of the Summit on Biodiversity. And also there's a high-level political forum session on protecting the planet and building resilience. And because the theme is, this is the super year for nature, UN Women has been linking biodiversity in all of these processes. So even if the focus is climate change, we take the opportunity to always bring in biodiversity. So I was working with the CBD Secretariat on this. Thank you for the interest, and I'm sorry that I haven't consulted widely, but with some experts, we indeed brought in biodiversity developments in the biodiversity process.
Thank you, Verona. I'll give the floor to Pranilla because I see a lot of interest in that. So Pranilla, would you like to take the floor for a minute to share?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to confirm we had so much positive feedback on this workshop on human rights as an enabling condition for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And many of the people active in this movement, of course, are the one fighting for gender rights, that also include environmental rights defenders, for example, where women are in particular vulnerable. We presented the outcome of the workshop at the Open-Ended Working Group 2 in the plenary. And we actually had very good interaction with many of the governments. And I think that, for example, Costa Rica and Argentina and Mexico, we can have very many that can take the lead of this. And we also hope that we can encourage European Union that actually also have this as part of the Council's conclusions, that human rights are important, that we can bring this forwards to be included as a human rights-based approach and a women rights-based approach from the government, through the whole post-2020 framework. And I can also say a big thanks to APP as our local host in Chiang Mai for the workshop. And I hope the link does not work. so you can read it. It will be also a longer report that we will present at Substack. So, and everybody can also contact me, for example, if they want to learn more and take part in this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pranil. I'm so happy you are here. Thank you so much. So I would also actually take this opportunity, Basile and Francis, I know we are getting a little bit out of time, but if you could have 5 more minutes, I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Vienna, who's here. For people who are engaged with the CBD, one of the outcome of an initial meeting that took place in Montreal on gender was this group called Friends of Gender Equality. And we had Canada and Malawi take on this responsibility to organize this group and take some of the work on gender considerations forward in the post-2020 and beyond. So Vienna, thank you so much for joining. Could you please say a few words?
Yes, thank you. And it's so great to virtually see everyone, and thank you to all the presenters for sharing all the wonderful information about initiatives and ongoing discussions around gender. So appreciative to be able to kind of connect into this kind of conversation. As Tina mentioned, the Friends of Gender Equality group was started in 2018 and has since had meetings at every single meeting of the CBD. And so we are a collection of various stakeholder groups, but also parties that are interested and consider themselves champions or allies within the CBD of advancing gender considerations. And I'd like to point back to something that that Francis said early on during the co-chair presentation with regards to the importance of, in terms of moving forward discussions on gender in the context of CBD meetings, the importance of identifying allies and parties in order to kind of support and advance positions. And so in the build up to Substack and SBI, we've noted a number of documents or relative agenda items that are going to be of particular importance for gender. To please, I'm happy as one of the participants in the Friends of Gender Equality to share any input that anyone in the group might have with other parties as much in advance as meetings as possible, and during meetings also. It's important. I'd be happy to share input and positions and thoughts with other parties and help facilitate that discussion and help and facilitate that uptake from input from parties during the meetings. So that connection is happening, and as much advance to the meetings as possible, if we can start having those discussions about input and suggestions, I think that will be really important and helpful in terms of advancing the discussions and the negotiations. So just wanted to say that, and thank you again to the presenters and organizers. I think this is a great call, very interesting.
Thanks, thank you so much, Vienna. I'm so happy you're able to also join. I know the co-chairs have limited time until now. So I just wanted to extend, if there was any pertinent question that anybody has, one question before we can also close this session. Yes, so I think Basile needs to leave, and I think many of you might also. So before we go, then can I just, I think we might also have a follow-up meeting, a follow-up webinar, looking at the kind of interest that you've had so far. So I wanted to ask if all of us could open our screens for like 10 seconds so I could take a screenshot, if that's okay with you, just to see who all are there, and then before we close. Like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Hi, everybody. I see we have kind of crossed globally. A lot of people have joined in from different places through different time zones. So thank you very, very much for being here. Give me a minute. I'm going to take a screenshot. Okay, hold on. So, so yes, please, if you have any questions. Oh, I see some youth here. I see some parties here. I see a lot of my colleagues from different places. So thank you so much. Thank you, Basile. Thank you, Francis. Thank you so much, Tanya. Verona, thank you for being here. Vienna, thank you so much. And I see, wow, more and more colleagues here. And thank you for the discussion. I think we will make a copy of the chat, and maybe we can get into another in-depth discussion on how to go forward, especially also Lorena, from your experience with the UNFCCC, including the UNIA. So I was trying to moderate, so I didn't want to ask many questions, but thank you so much for your time. And I'm really happy to see so many faces. So from my side, thank you, and take care. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Lorena.
Bye.
Hello.
Thank you. Nice to meet
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, Tina. Bye-bye.
We have people from UNFF.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Women, people who can stay here. I'll introduce some people. You have UNFF. Oh, we have other people from Myanmar joining in. Oh, we also have from Malaysia. Hi, how are you? Guadalupe, hi.
Our Vice Minister wants to come in.
So yeah, hi Verona, hi. I asked whether you wanted to take the space. So that's our colleague from within the IFB. You also have the Indigenous Women Biodiversity Network, and the work that we are doing is basically building up on a lot of work that they have also been contributing to the Post2020. They are there. Hi Juliana. Juliana is a crucial member also of the IFB and IWBN. And Akimi, hi. Hi, everybody. Okay, I'm just excited to see everybody after a very long time. Hi, Irini. Irini is also a very amazing youth who also helps us with our graphics and is also doing great work. Verena, thank you. Oh my God, I think I'm going out of thanking people here now. There's some people who want to join again. This is incredible. Hi, Anna. A special thanks to Anna, who's from FARN and also our advisory board. I had asked them to say a word, but I think we had a lot of discussions, so we kind of ran out of time. And Raymond is somewhere here, and I need to thank somebody wants to join again. This is interesting. We have for our interpretations. Sorry, we had some technical glitches today. Raymond, thank you if you're hearing me. Thank you so very, very much for all your efforts in translating. It's not easy when you have an ongoing discussion. So thank you very much. Hi, Christina, Edna, Lori, hi. Lori is another of our members here. All right, I'm gonna you guys are still here. I think you're any words? I'm the only one who's.
It's great to see everybody. I'm just looking at all the faces. It's nice.
Florina, hola.
Hola, Florina. ¿Qué tal?
It's amazing.
So, or Georgina, hi. So please, please put your Myrna, hi Myrna. We have people from different ecosystems calling us. I know Myrna is somewhere in some community I think in Peru or somewhere. I don't know where you are right now, but thanks for joining in.
Hi, I'm from Bangladesh.
Oh, hi, nice, welcome.
Yes, thank you. I'm from Chittagong Hill Tracts.
Yes, so could you have a quick introduction? Whoever is there, we know Verona, can you quickly say hi, hello, and then we'll see who all are there.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, and this is very, very encouraging. We want to reach out to this group for another consultation like this, for inputs. Thank you.
Okay, you already know me. I've been talking a lot. This is Tina. Hi, everybody. My Women's Caucus. Lorena, please. We'll go as the screens fall. Please introduce yourself very quickly. Where you're from.
Hi, I'm Kini from Nagaland, northeast of India.
Hi, Kini. Nice to meet you. She's also with the Naga women. So, okay.
Nagaland.
I already know you. Boy, hi. You got to say your name. Another important person.
Hi.
Who's there? Amika. You gotta tell you who you are, where you are.
Oh, right. Okay. Hi, everyone. I know some of you already. I'm Nika. I'm currently in Scotland, up in Oban on the west coast. I am a PhD student looking at participatory processes at the CBD negotiations, and I've also been helping out across various groups. That's me. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you. Dan, what about you? So good to see you. Dan, please.
Hello, I'm Tan from Malaysia. I'm work with the wildlife department. So really from the biodiversity now and learn how to do the gender issues. Thank you.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to meet you, Tanya.
Irini. Irini, I'm calling out to you.
Oh, hi. Hi everyone. It's so amazing. It's so amazing to be here. Thank you very much. I'm Irini. I am based in Germany. I'm originally from Greece and I'm working for Global Landscapes Forum. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Amelia, for organizing this, and thank you all for being here. It's been lovely.
Guadalupe.
Hello, I'm Guadalupe Yesenia from Mexico, and I work with traditional knowledge. I'm indigenous Zapotec, and work with the biocultural protocols and gender issues, making some advocacy in national and international level. Also with the IPBE, in the International Indigenous Forum of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Is other area so important for gender, for addressing gender issues. Nice to see you, all of you in the world, around the world. Have a good day. This morning.
Yes, have a good day, have a good night.
Florina. Florina, you can speak in Spanish. Florina.
Yo soy Florina López, saludos a todos y a todas. Soy la coordinadora de la Red de Mujeres Indígenas sobre Biodiversidad, CUNA de Panamá. CUNA's Peoples.
Ana. Anna, we can't hear you. Okay, I think I'll to a lot of people.
Do you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Ana Di Pangracio, working at Fundación Ambiente y Recursos Naturales, based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I got a cat on my lap. And through the lockdown. We've been in lockdown since last March 20th, and it looks like we'll be in lockdown till September, so it's complicated. But it's nice to meet you all. I'm following the biodiversity agenda, working at the international level with the CBD, but also at the local level, especially on wetlands and forests. Thank you.
Extension of we had introduction, Juliana. Where are you? Hey, Juliana. Juliana, your video's off. Christina. I'm taking random people now. Oh, that's Raymond too. All right, I think there are a lot of people here, so I won't kind of force everybody to talk. But thank you once again so much for being here. And I will catch up with you if you have any questions. Please reach out. And one reminder for who all are here, as Tanya was talking, there is a call to the Secretariat for good practices on gender consideration and biodiversity plans and actions. So if you have case studies, please contribute or reach out to also us. And from your organizations or your networks, please look at that notification. All right, bye everybody, good night, and
bye. Bye, thanks everybody. Adios.
Ciao.